we'll see this. I don't know. Oh. Yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry. I gave you the same notes because I got to get through the notes. We got to get through the literature. So I took a couple of sidetracks. I hope you enjoyed them. But hey, now I have this, and I'm totally trained in how to use a smartboard. So, yeah, no, I think we'll see if it gets boring. But when we get to the translation part, I think I can really show you some neat stuff that we can actually look at the Greek and the Greek words right there and see them from my notes. So that'll be really fun. But the important thing about this, and I put those words back up because these are the first words in general that we're going to kind of see when we get to John and begin translating John. So the words Lego, telos, and I in the past I've given you the Greek alphabet. You go look at the Greek alphabet yourself, look on your phone, save it as a picture or whatever. But this is an L, that's the E there. They have multiple E sounds, that's long E. That's a G and an O. And by the way, trailing O's are really interesting in Greek because usually the trailing with an S, if you have a trailing O, it looks like a W, it's the omega. And with a regular, it's omicron, so O. It has a slightly different sound, but not that big a difference. Logos. And also, I got to mention this. Okay, we never changed our language in 1917. The rest of the world did. The Greeks did. And the Greeks, when they modernized languages, when you modernize languages, what do? You get rid of extraneous sounds. I don't know if you're familiar with German, modern German. All the words directly equate to syllabic sounds, to phonetic sounds in their language. In French, they do that too. Russian does that. Modern Greek does that. Ancient Greek does not. But in 1917, almost every language in the world, this is really funny stuff, right? Because this is probably one of the most important pieces of language information that your language teachers should have told you. That all the languages in the world reconstituted themselves in 1917, except English. English was the language that didn't. And that's why in English, the British English didn't, and American English didn't. So we still spell was, W-A-S. Or something else, right? Who knows what we, right? Instead of actually phonetically sounding out words, we still have the funky spellings. And we wanted, I'm surprised that we didn't actually do it. Anyway, this is really important. So if you try to equate modern Greek to ancient Greek, you're going to have a few problems. The Greek speakers can do it because trailing S or trailing sigma, you'll see sigma, right? That's sigma. That's trailing sigma.
Because it's a different direction?
Well, it's more of a, it's more like our S. And well, okay, what do we get from, we got a lot of stuff from Greek, but you notice in English, we make plurals out of words by putting an S on the end of it, in general. This isn't the way they make plurals, but their trailing S's, sigmas, are always this way, where if you find a sigma in the middle of a thing, I'll point these things out to you. It's just really fun. When we start looking at the Greek, you'll probably ignore it, who cares? But it's just, I think it's really interesting to see how languages change.
So why did they change it in 1917?
The world changed. Boy, why did they change? That is, number one, they wanted to phoneticize and simplify their language because there were two things that were happening. The great intellectual revolution really happened around the early 1800s, 1820s. That's when books became very available to the masses of people. they could afford not just books, but pamphlets and, penny novels and things like that really became popular. But languages were very complex. And so to simplify languages, and there was a big thing. You guys remember, what was that language, the made-up language? I think it starts with an
Esperanto.
Esperanto. Esperanto came out of the same thing. People believed after World War I, in the era of World War I, that the problem with communication was that it was too hard to communicate. So Esperanto was developed. Everyone wanted to simplify their languages so they had better communication, better writing, whatever. What it did is it really messed up, it really caused huge problems. Why do you think? Everybody that knew how to read, well, look at the German Bible we have. That's in Old German before the German was rectified, normalized. And if you go look at it, you go, holy smoke! These letters are strange. They have funny looking letters, even in print. And you go, this is not what your German looks like if you pick up a German book today. Because they have extraneous letters. There are letters that are used in sound letters and sound formations that are odd. Just like in English, I show this all the time, right? Ash. Ash. A-E. This is a letter in English called ash. The, it's this sound. The. The is really, actually, the is most correctly in English, the F of Thorna. I think it's Thorna. Thorna, ash. That's the in English Saxon. That's the in English, in ancient English, Old English. Is Thorna, ash. Why do we do TH? Because we didn't simplify our language. The French took us over. When the French came in, we got an immediate language simplification or whatever. So anyway, languages change and they're really interesting. And the World War I thing, World War I had ramifications that we don't. Anybody ever studied World War I? No. Look at you, shake your head. Anybody ever studied World War II? Did you study World War I?
I read a lot of books. That's it.
No, you did, right? But you didn't see it. They didn't teach it in school. The thing is, World War I was one of the most consequential wars that ever affected the world. It was the first world war, and it affected nations. It affected Britain. What was the greatest effect of World War I on Britain? I know I'm going down a rabbit hole, sorry.
Lost their prominence.
Why? Why did they lose their prominence? What caused them? What was the direct cause of the loss of British sovereignty over the world?
The entrance of the United States into the war?
No, population. They killed almost 25% of their fertile males in World War I. And World War II took the rest of them out. They basically lost an enormous amount of their population. The French didn't as much as they did, and the Germans didn't as much as the British did. The British lost an enormous amount of their population. The United States has been relatively secure from that because there's lots of reasons. But that, if you wonder, why did British sovereignty go from ruling the world to ruling a little bitty island with some, whatever? And that's the reason. They destroyed their people. It's huge, but they don't teach it. Why wouldn't you teach that? I don't know. Pretty good at here. Anyway, the thing that's important is that when we look at languages, we're looking at ancient Greek. And so the things that I want to teach in the class, if you guys got doctrinal theological questions, I said this before, ask them. We'll talk about it in a historical context, right? But the point of the class is culture, history, and language. So if we can get the language down, because that's my question, what does it really say? So we'll get there. But the problem is, to understand what does it really say, you've got to understand how languages work. And so I gave you some notes here, some little notes. But let's talk about ancient languages. ancient languages themselves. So ancient literature. In all ancient literature, we see distinct differences between, isn't this cool? I like this stuff. Oh. Let's see. We see you have narrative. And for example, a narrative, Herodotus, right? Herodotus is a narrative. You see narratives in the Old Testament. Most of the Old Testament are narratives, right? Almost everything is narratives. Genesis is a narrative. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, they're all narratives. What's the difference? Well, you also have the thing called dialogues. Dialogues. Dialogue. If we have Herodotus, Herodotus, and you have, for example, the Socratic dialogues are a dialogue. You don't see a lot of dialogues in the Old Testament, in the Tanakh. You see.
Would Job be
That's
considered
what
a
I was
dialogue?
wondering about Job.
Where you see a dialogue, the implication is that they are talking. And so, like in the Socratic dialogues, you'll see that they actually, it's like a play. They'll say Socrates, they don't have punctuation, double colon. He says this, right? Or in many times the translation will say Socrates said and continue, but there's no narrative. In other words, there's no setting, right? Where, for example, look at Isaiah, right? Isaiah has narrative and saying, most of it's sayings, but you go all the time. Don't you think all the time? Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? Why is he saying these things, right? There's no context, because in a dialogue there is no context. Sometimes they'll give you a context. The Psalms. What did the Septuagint? By the way, all those notes about the Psalms, this is a Psalm of David, this is a whatever Psalm of coronation, those are all added in the Septuagint. They are not in the original Hebrew. What are they trying to do? They're trying to give you a setting. That would be a narrative construction. But you find in ancient literature almost all, and I use Greek examples here, but you remember all the other stuff we looked at, right? All the other ancient documents. There are narratives, right? They're all narratives. There was no dialogue. It didn't say Manus said. It said Manus, la 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 la, right? Supreme God of whatever, and and then everybody bowed down, right? It didn't say, and if you look at almost all ancient documents can be categorized as narrative or dialogue. That's what you see. In the Old Testament, Tanakh, we usually define them. We'll say this is, we don't even talk about narrative, it just is, right? But dialogues, we'll call this prophecy. So, prophecy. So when you have a prophecy, a prophetic thing, then, is Job prophecy? There is some dialogue going around in Job, right? Where God comes and Satan's talking, right? And the construct, and then, yes, goes to Job is a dialogue. Isn't that interesting? And there's some context in Job, which is also interesting because it's a very ancient document. The thing is that we see in ancient literature narrative and dialogue, and then something happened. And something marvelous happened. And if you don't believe me, Tammy's reading C.S. Lewis again. C.S. Lewis is wonderful to read, but C.S. Lewis will say, I don't remember where it was, I think it's Mere Christian, maybe Mere Christianity, one of them. He talks about how the Gospels created a new type of literature. And the creation of the gospel literature was where the narrative and the sayings come together in one. And by the way, if you haven't already started reading in John, John is a wonderful example because they have no punctuation, but it says over and over and over again, and Jesus said to him, and so said to him, and Nicodemus came to Jesus and said to him. And it gives you the context of where they are, right? And then it gives you the dialogue. So what C.S. Lewis called this is he said this is the advent of modern literature. Because modern literature, where the ancient literature was narrative and dialogue, modern literature is like the Gospels. It's this blend. It's a blend of narrative and dialogue. In other words, you have a setting. And by the way, Gnostic documents, for example, the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas. I don't know if you ever read it. The Gospel of Thomas is a sayings gospel. There is no narrative. It's all dialogue. It's a sayings gospel. It's a Gnostic gospel. Christ is supposedly talking to his disciples. Is it true? Well, I didn't go through all the bibliographical. I have a class I teach with all the bibliographical information about Gospel of Thomas, the Archegos documents, and all this other stuff, and I've taught a little bit about it. But I'll just tell you, I'll give you the punchline. Okay? The Gospel of Thomas does not meet the bibliographical criteria very well. We only have, I think, one copy. And it was found in a Gnostic source. It was found in one of those, the Nag Hammadi. It's part of the Nag Hammadi library, the Nag Hammadi documents. And Nag Hammadi are almost all Gnostic Gospels. You never find the approved. I don't want to say approved. You don't find the historical Gospels with Gnostic Gospels historically. So just remember this, what we're looking at, and this is the thing to look for. I know you're all standing at home reading ancient documents. Okay, no, I know you're not. But when we look at John, the thing to look for is this narrative and sayings put together in what we would call modern literature. And that's C.S. Lewis. It's not me. So C.S. Lewis is great. Now, the other thing is that how does a language work, right? We never think about this. Unfortunately, in America, we don't know many languages. Usually, most of us maybe know English, right? And a few of us know maybe another tongue. You know, in Europe, the average person may know 3 or 4 languages. They even know how to read and write cogently in those languages, and this is really a good thing. The thing is that languages culturally are different, but there's another thing about ancient languages. Ancient languages are not like modern languages. And I think I put a little note down there. I call it scientific rationalism. The Greeks were not really a scientific rational society. They were a society developing scientific rationalism. So what we get is, and we've talked about this, we have the 3 ways to know truth. The first one that was invented by Herodotus pretty much, well, the Greeks invented it. Herodotus was the first guy writing it. But it's a historical method. Historical method. The second one that was invented by the Greeks is logic. And the third is the scientific method. So you have the historical method, logic, and the scientific method. And these are the means to know truth. We've talked about those before. But you have to be able to effectively use these. Okay, here's a question of the day. Did the Greeks effectively use these? Okay, so there are Greek monuments that are wonderful and they're still standing. Okay, which is really cool. But it's hard to say. Who's really known? Okay, what did the Romans do?
Aqueducts and everything.
Roads, everything, you name it.
Everything, right? The Greeks, okay, did anything the Greeks build improve the lives of the Greeks?
It'd be beautiful.
Oh, I love that.
Philosophy, poetry.
Well, yeah, it seemed like, okay, they were happy to have sewers and happy to have bad water as long as they could think about it, right, and talk about it. So, yeah, and when you're, and remember, all these cultures are slave-based. All of them. In every culture, only about 20% are not slaves, period. So, a huge number of slaves, slave-based societies, and it's just the way they are. You can rail against it all you want, but that's the world, okay, in the ancient world, and by the way, in the modern world to 1833. So, the Greeks were really not that great. They invented really cool stuff like the capstone, but guess what they never built? They never built domes. They built arches, but never built domes. It seemed like, this is a cool idea, let's use it, and it worked. And it's like, okay, that's it, we proved it, let's go on. The Greeks, and I've said this to you before, the Greeks built roads to the temples. Well, they didn't build roads to the marketplaces, so guess where the marketplaces came? By the temples. And that's where all the meat was, which is really a cool idea, because remember, you didn't eat meat unless it was sacrificed. So all of these things fit together. So what has that got to do with language? Well, we expect, and I'll tell you this, this is what you were supposed to be taught when you were learning about writing. In English, this is what you're supposed to write. You're supposed to always write intro, body, and conclusion. This is the way the Romans write. This is the way we write. We expect everyone to write this way. And if you don't know this, please start writing this way, because you're going to have serious problems if you don't. This is the way every paper in English, or every paper in the English language is supposed to be written. And if you get marked down and you didn't follow this, there's a reason. Okay? So, matter of fact, our paragraphs, you may or may not have heard this, I hope you've heard this, your paragraphs are supposed to be written in topic, sentence, intro, the body of the paragraph, and then you don't have to conclude, but you have to, what do they call it? Transition to the next paragraph, which could be considered a small conclusion. Yes, ma'am?
Now, if that's true, why do we study William Faulkner in English? Because he did not have intro by
Who?
William Faulkner.
You mean his novels, or do you mean?
His novels.
Okay.
Creative Consciousness.
That's different.
All right, I can answer your question, and it is, but let me answer your question. There's a very great answer. You may have, if you heard this, you had really great teachers. A novel, this is the way you're supposed to write a paper and a paragraph. And generally novels are written to a degree like this, but novels are not. Novels are 5 parts. The first part is what we call the initial scene. The initial scene. The second part is the rising action. The third is the climax. The fourth is the falling action. And the fifth is the denouement. Denouement. So every novel, okay, there are novels, there are a few novels that do not fit this, but you don't read them. I guarantee you, because they're boring. Roman Fleuve novels, for example, John Dos Passos. Faulkner does follow this, not as well as you'd like, because I find his novels boring and inhumane, but that's my personal opinion. I do not like Faulkner very well. But every novelist that is a successful novelist will have an initial scene, a rising action, a climax, falling, and these are really short. This can be a scene, and this is usually a scene. But that's training in novels. But novels are a little different in a very advanced form, of writing. If you think about Genshi, which is the first novel, it does not. It follows initial, it just goes, it's a wackadoodle. Well, it's a great novel, you should read it, but it's wackadoodle because the lady, Miyazaki, was inventing the novel form. So it's basically multiples of these. It's like multiple novels put together in one piece, and you'll find that. As a matter of fact, anybody heard the Decameron by Boccaccio? Or the Canterbury Tales? Right? Those were short stories that people put together. So guess what? They're a compendium of these. This is a good short story also follows this format. But don't write your technical papers like this. Do not. Do not. If you do, you'll probably not get a good grade, and they might not get published in a peer-reviewed thing. But yes, this is a very advanced form. But if you notice, it is a very advanced form of this.
What's that word you used, number 5?
Denouement.
The
A denouement is a...
Is that French?
yes.
Data?
Denouement. And don't ask me to spell it.
Spell it.
D-E-N-O-U-M-O-N.
It's got an accent in there someplace. But a denouement is, okay, you have a climax where the hero finally overcomes the telic flaw of the novel, whatever, or he doesn't if it's a tragedy. And then you have the following action, which may be a few scenes, usually 1 scene to 2 scenes, where the whole story is being wrapped up. You know, the detective explains how he solved the problem after the big shootout with the bad guy, right, capturing him. And then the denouement is usually the end scene. It's the cap scene of the novel, where the novelist closes up everything and, you know, says...
Right into the sunset.
And then right into the sunset, yes, literally. The denouement is a French term, but this is, okay, if you want to write a novel, I can teach you how to write a novel, this way you do it. So, but it follows the same form, but you notice it's a more complex form. See? Now, ancient documents. Okay, so let's look at ancient documents. Ancient documents do not follow the intro body conclusion. You say, why? They were not, what's the word I use here? They were not into scientific rationalism. What are they into? They are into, okay, let's never forget this. Animism, pantheonic paganism, 3, mysticism, or mysterion. It's mysterion. And 4, Gnosticism. This is the evolution of religion. Okay, and you see this in every culture except there are some very unique cultures where you do not see this. The Hebraic culture apparently went from animism to something similar to mysterion. Okay, I've tried to find these before. In the beginning, animism is the idea that spirits run the world. Spirits move everything. Anything that moves, anything that lives, anything that breathes, anything that reproduces has a spirit in it. And therefore you must placate the spirits. As people become literate with literacy breeds what's called pantheonic paganism. The thing is that suddenly you have words for stuff you don't have words for in animism, like love. None of the words, you cannot have a word that is not an obvious noun or verb pre-literacy. That's why I told you there are no forms pre-literacy. And by the way, I guess I explained this is really important. Names are the most important thing in communication. How do we know this? The Japanese culture is a very ancient culture that kind of got ripped into the modern era. And it's a very odd culture in some ways. One of the things is you know what the most horrible word is in their language? Hini, which means you. If if you say Kime to anyone, they won't punch you because they're very kind people, but they will be very irritated. You know, you people that can't remember names, in a Japanese culture, you would be in shambles. Because whenever someone tells you their name in Japanese, you refer to them with that name from then on. You don't ever use you. This is classic in all ancient languages. In our language, what have we done? What happens as languages mature and grow? The population matures and grows, and eventually get to the point where you can't use people's personal names anymore to refer to them, right? Because now we have forms, right? In literacy, you have forms. So in literacy, I can talk about you, or you, plural, or everyone, or anyone, or someone, right? But I can't really talk about those things if I have no form. You do even you pretty early in a language. But unless I have a form, what you am I talking about, right? If I say, well, you, and it's a crowd of people, no, you got to use the name, Bob, or Paul, or whoever, because, like I said, in Japanese culture and ancient culture, saying you is completely unacceptable in their language, because they are an ancient language form. Anyway, so what you see is, with pantheonic paganism, suddenly words that could not exist before forms could exist, like mountain, right? Remember I told you, you can't have you can't have mountains. You can have a mountain with a name, right? But you can't have mountains because there's no form until I have literacy. And then literacy, all of a sudden I need names for other things, right? For non-nouns and verbs, like love. I have to have a goddess of love. Guess what? Why do I have to have a goddess of love? Or a god
for everything.
What's that?
There was a God for everything.
Well, not exactly. If you're pre-literate and if you don't know this word, right? If you're pre-literate, then what do I have to do to make that word real? I give it a name and a person, right? So, who was it? Diana or no? Is it Diana? I can't remember.
Roman.
I think that's Roman. Okay, whatever. Diana. I give it a...
Aphrodite.
Aphrodite. Yeah. Aphrodite. So Aphrodite, I instead of the common people who are not literate, how do they express love? I use the term Aphrodite, and how to explain love. It's Aphrodite. Aphrodite is love, right? Isn't it interesting that we have a statement in the New Testament that says, God is love, right? Because if in a pantheonic pagan world, I have to have separate words or gods to represent these things. So I'm not living, we can go any further, we can go further. Mysterion, in Mysterion, you get to Mysterion when you invent reason or logic. The thing about Mysterion is, remember the spirits move everything and make everything work? Well, literacy doesn't solve that problem, but suddenly in logic and reasoning, people begin to realize that stuff happens without the aid of spirits. Now, it's not what you think. We'll talk about Mysterion at some point in more detail, but Mysterion is really interesting because you would think that the stuff that would get people all, into Mysterion would be like fire, right? But it's not. It's pie. You say,
Not apple?
not apple pie. Pie pie.
What pie?
For pie. Because, remember what we said about the Greeks? That there's two ways to go. You can either go really super euphemistic, like Hebrews and English, you can go euphemistic, or you can go concrete and geometric with your language. The Greeks went concrete and geometric with their language. And so, for example, the telos, right, is the vanishing point. The telos is a vanishing point. Well, who could ever imagine that the telos would be a vanishing point? I mean, whoa! A conclusion is a vanishing point on the horizon based on a logos, a logical argument? I mean, that's like, whoa, that's deep, right? Well, the same guys that are thinking that a logos, a logical argument, will give you a telos, a conclusion like that, very geometric. Also, we're thinking about pi. What's the problem with pi?
It keeps going
It
further.
keeps going. It's infinite.
It's an irrational, non-real number. Whoa! And the Greeks knew that. And so what got them wasn't fire. It's the spirits making the fire, right? Matter of fact, Zeus, the pure of Zeus, fire, this is a word for Greek for fire, it means the fire from Zeus, pure. Because Zeus was that spirit, that pantheonic pagan thing that could make fire from lightning. Apollo could make fire from the sun. That's interesting, isn't it? Different types of fire. Same spirit. Well, different spirits. Anyway, so that didn't get him. What got him was pi. And the other thing that got him was Pythagoras. Pythagorean theorem was another mysterion. How could this be?
I learned if you go out the back door there, you can't come back in.
Well, you're welcome.
Well, it's still telling us that.
I mean, these are things we learned, right? Yes, sir.
When does science come in here?
Ah. Science leads you to Gnosticism. Now, there are only two religions in the world that do not follow this stream. Hebrew, Jews, the Jewish belief structure, and Christianity. They both of them look like mysterions, but they're not mysterions. How do you know? Because a mysterion is always defined by a secret initiation. Mysterions, why? Okay, why? In Animus, you just tell your kids, okay, there's a spirit in the tree. There's a spirit in the water. There's a spirit in whatever. That's cool. In pantheonic paganism, you as a culture have come to an agreement that these words indicate these things. Aphrodite, Zeus, whatever her name is, all these, the most famous, Hestia. Hestia is the most famous goddess there is, periodic. Hestia, the goddess of the heart. Each of these gods and goddesses represent something, but you teach them culturally. You teach them culturally. You write it down, myths, right? Myth cycles and things like that. You teach them culturally. In Mysterion, Mysterions are very interesting because you teach them they are secret societies where you are going to learn the mystery. The mystery of the Osirian Mysterion is pi. How they depicted it, we have no idea. The secret of, we only know a few of these. We know about 3. We know the Mithrin, we know the Osirian, and we know the Pythagorean. But they kept them secret. They were secrets. Yes, sir.
We talked about Mormonism last week. Mormonism kind of loops Christianity back into Mysterion because they've got a secret. Nobody that's not Mormon has ever been to a Mormon baptism. And
Yeah.
a lot of other
other
rites
stuff,
and things like that
yeah,
are
other rites.
secretive. It's for insiders only. So
Bingo. As a matter of fact, there are other groups. Masons.
Mason.
Masons are a Mysterion. Sororities and fraternities, if you were a member of a sorority or fraternity, are Mysterions. Now, is there a real problem with playing with Mysterions? Well, Jesus was not very happy with Mysterions, but Paul, and by the way, all the New Testament except Hebrews, were really happy with Mysterions because Christianity looks like a Mysterion. So it's really easy to attract people that are interested. The difference was they didn't have a secret initiation until they were really getting persecuted, and then they really tried not to do it in secret. They told everybody flat out, the mystery of Christ is Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. So the mystery of faith, which is called the mystery of faith, is the mystery of the Christian so-called Mysterium, right? And, okay, I guess I'll say this. Remember, in Acts, the Greeks first called the Christians Christians in Antioch. Why? Because they thought it was a Mysterion. You always name the Mysterions after your god or leader. And Christ was the head of the Christian Mysterion, right? And also their God. So the Assyrian Mysterion, the Pythagorean Mysterion, the Mithran Mysterion, named after their gods, right? Or their leaders. So, yes, sir.
How much of that was also driven by the fact that they were being persecuted also in the early days? They had to kind of keep things a secret.
They didn't want to keep it a secret, and they would be open about, like, part of the appeal. Okay, if you want to be a Mason, you got to spend like 20, 30 years going up the knowledge tree because it's a true mysterion. It is a true mysterion. It has a secret initiation. Each of the initiations are secret. And I'm not a Mason. I just know what I read about it, right? Mormon Church is very similar. If you want, it's a secret initiation. It goes through secret initiation pass. You have to do things. You get the secret underwear, all this kind of stuff, right? And then you reach. Don't take it off even when you're married. I don't know. It's just interesting stuff. So, Mysterions always have that, and you got to be there for a long time. Where Christianity, they said, we'll tell you what the mystery is. And everybody was like, wow, I don't have to spend 30 years, learning getting the rings and learning the handshakes and stuff like that. And they go, yeah, come on, By the way, Mysterions almost always have baptism. They almost always have a meal with the deity, like a Eucharistic meal, sacrificial meal. There's a whole list. And when we talk about Mysterion, because you can't talk about the Gospels without talking about Mysterion. Why? It's the culture. It'd be like if we were to talk about, and they do, if you were to talk about modern America without including secularism and Christianity and a lot of other stuff, right? You go, what are you talking about, right? It's impossible to talk about that century, the first century, without bringing up Mysterion, pantheonic paganism, and animism. This is what motivated people, and this is what motivated their writing. So when we say science, right? The reason science leads to Gnosticism, what is Gnosticism's goal? Gnosticism is seeking God through knowledge, yes. You see, the secularists would say we're seeking knowledge, right? But what they're really doing is they're seeking salvation through knowledge. Gnosticism is literally seeking salvation through knowledge. You notice Mysterion is seeking God through a mystery, through knowledge. Pantheonic paganism, that's sacrifice, it just exists. And animism, that's the natural state of the world. But you see where we're coming from here. They don't believe that fire is caused by oxygen, a spark, and a substrate to burn on, a substance to burn, right? That's outside of their view. What causes fire? Yeah. Well, in pantheonic paganism, it's Zeus or Apollo. But in animism, it's the spirit of fire, right? So you can't even discuss scientific rationalism. There's no way to even bring it into the picture, right? Because this is why if you don't like bank your fire at the end of the day in Greek culture, and you don't put the alpha in the morning and the omega at night, they'll kill you. They'll kill you. Because you are disrespecting Hestia and the spirit of fire that Hestia protects, that is the heart. And you have betrayed as a traitor to the community. They'll kill you if you don't follow these little things. And so, their whole, everything is based in the spirits and the gods. And so therefore, can I expect people to write in intro, body, conclusion? Scientific rationalism? No, it's impossible. So how do they write? And this is where, probably the most important point and the point of ancient literature comes from. I can erase my little thing here, because we are going to look at what they call the Logos to Telos of John. I'm going to look at it first because we're going to preempt it, and that's what I want to look at next lesson. We'll look at the Logos to Telos of John, and we're going to just go over it in a very general fashion. But ancient languages, ancient Greek, writes, and this is the way I like to write it, probably Logos, I should write it like this, Logos Telos. They always write in a Logos to unstated telos. Now, where's an example? Okay, I know you're at home reading the Socratic dialogues every day, right? If you go back and look at all the Socratic dialogues, all the Greek dialogues, if you ever wondered, okay, one of the reasons you had problems understanding them when your teacher taught them to you in high school or even college is because your teachers did not understand. You were looking for intro, body, conclusion, and your teachers were looking for intro, body, conclusion, when the Greek text is written in a Logos to Telos, an unstated telos. Now, how do I know this? You guys remember Aesop's fables? Let's see, it's Ash, Aesop. I think it's close. Anyway,
No, that's not, that's okay.
Aesop, it's A-E.
A-E-O, is
Huh?
that a no?
Yeah.
Well, that's supposed to be no. A-S-O, Aesop. Aesop's fables. Remember Aesop's fables? Okay, Aesop's fables. Each of the little fables is a logical argument. If you read the original Greek, there are no morals at the end of Aesop's fables. The people who added those morals were the Romans. So when they translated them into Latin, guess what they did? They picked morals because when Aesop wrote them, he was writing a logos to an unstated telos. He presumed that when you read it,
Smart.
you're smart enough to get the telos without being told. The Romans had a different idea. The Romans wanted intro, body, conclusion. So what did they have to add? The conclusion. This is why when you read Aesop's fables, and I guarantee you, you've probably never read the unexpurgated ones, because the unexpurgated ones are pretty raw about sex, sex, rape, and rock and roll. I'm not kidding. And about killing stuff. And your kids, they pulled all those way early. But if you read Aesop's fables, even the ones that are expurgated and happy for you, you will find that many times the moral does not match at all the logical argument. And you go, huh? What? Is this a mistranslation? Is this a... And most of us don't even think about mistranslation, right? We think, well, it's in English. It's got to be written in English. They're writing in English back in the... Aesop was writing in English, right? He's got to be. No, they wrote it in Greek, and then we basically put together in Latin, and then we got the morals added to it, and then, so Aesop's Fables is a perfect example of this Greek stuff. The the great examples are the dialogues. But the reason you had problems with the dialogues is because your teacher never told you. She or he or she may have inferred it, that there is no conclusion to any of the dialogues. The presumption is you will figure it out by listening.
One of the disadvantages of the Latin method is they give you the conclusion. That's the only conclusion you can reach. But with the Greek method, two different people might have very similar conclusions, but they're not exactly the same. But that's not wrong. It leaves the possibility that there's more ways to look at it than just one point of view.
I'm glad you said that, because Greek ambiguity, remember how euphemism is the name of English and Hebrew stuff. Okay? You get ambiguity just by talking. In English, we don't notice it because we're very contextualized, right? But I'm telling you, there's a lot of things you can say in the English language that might get you kicked out of a nice house. Just saying, even if you're not even saying anything bad. So euphemism is amazing in the way it works. On the other hand, when you have a very concrete language, sometimes ambiguity is a nice thing. Because you don't have to call baby ugly. Right? You know what I'm saying? So we see Greek ambiguity, and we will see some beautiful Greek. Matter of fact, the Sermon on the Plain from Luke, right? If you remember, we studied the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. We did it pretty detailed, and I told you, this is great Greek sarcasm. Jesus Christ was giving a hyperbolic, sarcastic statements. Every single one of them are opposite from what he said. Blessed is the peacemakers does not mean blessed are the peacemakers. You know, if you read it in the Greek, it's not what it says. If you notice in Luke, he told you you're not blessed if you're happy. Right? Right? I mean, this is Greek sarcasm and Greek ambiguity, and the only way to get to it is you've got to look at it as a logos to telos. And you've got to, and remember, we have beautiful tools in Greek, because Greek, remember a parabolo, and we'll talk about these things because we'll see some parabolo. A parabolo, literally in Greek, is an equation that approaches, and the Greeks would say, it crosses or approaches the axis at a single point. I drew it in a way that you probably wouldn't hear it. I'll draw it this way, maybe make it more understandable. Greeks were not stupid.
Make it more of a U shape, right?
Well, that is...
Like a parabola.
That's hyperbole. Okay, remember back to your geometry, right? The thing about it is, does anybody, if you had advanced mathematics, so you know integrals and differentials. The reason the Greeks knew this is because, you remember Zeno's paradox? You know what Zeno's paradox? Zeno's paradox is, if I'm going to the desk, I can move halfway to the desk, and I can move halfway to that, and halfway to that, and halfway to that, and I will never reach the desk.
I hated that thing. It used to drive me crazy.
So unsatisfying.
I know.
Well, the Greeks solved it. You know how they solved it? Integration. Integration solves that problem, because an infinite series that approaches an axis can be integrated to a solid number. That's why Zeno's paradox fails, because the Greeks saw that geometrically and they go, ha, we have an answer. We don't know why. It took Newton. Newton invented differentiation and integration. When he invented that, we had mathematics to be able to figure it out. But the Greeks knew it, that the integration of this gives you a whole number. And that's the answer to Zeno's paradox. But the point is that a parabola, a parabolo, is a logos with a single telos. A hyperbolo is a logos with multiple telos, they would say, the Greeks had only one axis to their system. So they would say that I have more than one answer, and they would say I have infinite. You say, how do they get that? Well, that's the way they got it. A hyperbole is a logos with multiple telos. They also had a diablo. Diabolo is a logos with no telos, which is what we translate as devil. It's like, wait a second, that's not what the Greek says at all. It says it's a logos without a telos. And you got devil out of it? How'd you get that? It doesn't say Satan, it says literally diabolo, okay? And there's another one. I can't remember what the other one is. There's another Greek term for a different thing. But the point is right on. In a Greek argument, you literally could have multiple answers. If it says it's a parabolo, there's only supposed to be one. If it doesn't say it's a parabolo, it's throwing it out. It's throwing it out. It doesn't mean that a reasonable person can't come to similar conclusions. It just means that the Greeks, there is intentional ambiguity in the Greek. And what we as readers and we as English speakers miss is that ambiguity. But it's in poetry, right? In English, I hope you know that. If you really love poetry, you know that the poet's power is ambiguity, right? They're not telling you straight on. You know that in great writing, part of the beauty of writing is ambiguity. Because everybody kind of sees the same scene the author is trying to depict to you a little bit differently. Because the author is trying to take from their brain, turn it into word symbols, put it on paper, and therefore, in English, we consider, what's the word? In writing, where you, figures of speech. In English, you probably don't know this, there are hundreds of different types of figures of speech in English, literally. Because we are a culture and a language that works on figures of speech. And the novels are full of it, because that's how we, as authors, communicate what we're trying to picture with our brains, is figures of speech. So, with this background, we can begin to understand ancient literature. And the point is that next week, what I'll look at is the Logos to tell us of John, kind of an overview, and then we'll begin to get directly into the translation of John, because we'll have the tools. We will have the tools to start. You got to have the tools to start. You can't start without the tools. So I'm giving you the tools, and we'll use them. And if you have questions, just keep asking, because I know these are hard to figure in your brain. But the more times we hear, the more times I understand what I'm talking about. Anyway, thank you, Lord, for this day. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray. Amen.
Would a good Greek say that